So, when the first offer of the building on the building fell through, Tasman gladly moved forward. Tolga, their executive director, expressed an immediate affinity for our congregation, believing that we are now connected through the building and a bit of divine providence. A number of us have been back in the old building for programs and meals, to drop off supplies for victims of the February 2023 earthquake, and attending a vigil in recognition of the suffering resulting from that earthquake. I spent an evening over there sharing about our faith and answering questions. It was awesome. And Tolga and Fuat, a leader from Tasman, came here and led a service for us. And last year during Ramadan, Serpil, who is Tolga's wife, invited us to an iftar dinner, which they hosted at Pilgrim House. We will join them once again, as I mentioned, on Monday, April 8th. The evening is not an educational event. It's really an event that reflects the generosity and interfaith work that comes from relationships built around meal times. It's joyful. It's a joyful and warm event where you can feel the heartfelt welcome and enjoy the home-cooked food. I always feel humbled when I am around folks from Tasman. There is just this kindness and warmth and openness that permeates all of the interactions I've had with them. So in light of this upcoming iftar dinner, fast-breaking dinner, and because of the importance of this holy month, I thought it would be helpful to explore Ramadan a bit today. I won't pretend to be an expert. I am far from it, but I'm dipping my toe into this rich faith and tradition and welcoming you to join me. I started my exploration and education for this service with a conversation with my friend Leslie, who was the person who planted the seed for this whole unfolding relationship with Tasman. Leslie is a convert, having been raised in a small town in Iowa. She was raised in a church that was a combination of Methodist and Presbyterian. Her grandma was the choir director, and she was in the youth group and played the handbells. A theological question that stirred within her as a young person created an internal tension. She struggled with the idea of Jesus being the Son of God. And when she questioned this premise, she was not well received. Many of you have been in similar situations in the faith communities of your childhood. Leslie was an AFS student in Turkey during her junior year in high school. She lived with a Turkish family, and she described that time as life-changing. She would meet Fuat, her husband, in college at the University of Iowa at a Turkish student meeting. It would take several years before they were married, and even more before they made their way to Minnesota. They have 3 sons who are 17, 15, and 12. The family is deeply connected to Tasman, and that is where the kids have learned about their culture and their faith. They have abis, which are college students who take on a role as an older brother and a mentor. Every Saturday, the boys are with their abis at Tasman. They read the Quran, they play games, they pray, and they are acculturated into the life of Turkish Muslim young men. Leslie is connected with Tasman as well, but the community she spends most of her time with is Rabada. Rabada is partially a bookshop in Arden Hills that is described as serving a global customer base with a specialty of curated collection of recommended books unique to Muslim lifestyle, gifts, Islamic books, both in English and in Arabic. And Rabada is also a cultural center, and the cultural center is the lifeline for Leslie. Their mission is to promote positive cultural change through creative educational experiences, spiritual upbringing, and community of local and digital places, they're hybrid as well, to connect like-minded women. It's all about progressive, well, I wouldn't say progressive, but it is pretty darn progressive. I'll tell you more about it. But like-minded women, so it's really a place for women to gather. It was founded by Dr. Tamara Gray, who was an undergraduate at Macalester, and then she received her doctorate at St. Thomas. I sat at a table with a number of women connected to Rabada when I was at a women's holiday cookie party at Tasman a couple of years ago. I was so taken with their connection to other Muslim women and to educating young people about their faith and their traditions. Rabada helps bring women into their whole selves and into being a practicing Muslim. During the month of Ramadan, when Muslims read the whole Quran, they take a couple pages every night. Rabada hosts a daily Quran does that sound right? Right, that's recitation, thank you. Recitation sessions at both regular and at slow pace. Leslie attends the slow pace. She is most grateful for the opportunity to read Arabic at a speed that she can follow, since she still finds the language extremely hard to learn. I could feel the depth of relationship that Leslie had with that sacred text. I love to think of what they describe as a spiritual oasis with a soul nourishing events for Muslim women existing just down the road in Arden Hills. It's kind of wild. We kind of live in a cool place, you guys. It was wonderful to have an opportunity to meet with Leslie on the first day of Ramadan. She described the first night of Ramadan in her house as happy and exciting, like Christmas, but multiplied. I think that book kind of captured some of the spirit of the joy of Ramadan. She talked about how the family decorated the house and lit candles, how they prayed together and woke up early in the morning before sunrise for their morning meal before the day of fasting. It's like peace, Leslie reflects. You don't feel anxious. You are aware of all of your senses, and you are more grounded. I kept hearing over and over again with the kind of daily fast that there's a heightened awareness of all of your senses and everything outside in the world. I'd like to bring the voice of Karen Armstrong, who is a well-known religious scholar. As a Westerner, influenced by my own naivete and the media and depictions of Muslim that became decidedly worse after 9/11, I find that I have been too quick to judge when it comes to a faith where many women cover their bodies with a hijab and the jibab. I have to keep reminding myself that there is no such thing as a monolithic religion. Muslims, just like any other faiths, have a range in belief and practice from conservative to liberal, and they live out their faith in many different ways as it connects to the culture and their families and their communities. Karen Armstrong articulates how religion often gets swept into the politics and of ego and power. This is the preface from her book titled Islam, A Short History. This book was actually reviewed in our UU World magazine many years ago. She says, the spiritual quest is an internal journey. It's psychic rather than a political drama. It's preoccupied with liturgy, doctrine, contemplative practices, and exploration of the heart, not with a clash of current events. Religions certainly have a life outside of the soul. Their leaders have to contend with the state and the affairs of the world, and they often relish doing so. They fight with members of other faiths who seem to challenge their claims to a monopoly of absolute truth. They also persecute their co-religionists for interpreting a tradition differently or for holding heterodox beliefs. Very often, priests, rabbi, imams, and shamans are just as consumed by worldly ambition as regular politicians. This does not happen to you ministers, of course. But all of this is generally seen as an abuse of a sacred idea. These power struggles are not what religion is really about, but an unworthy distraction from the life of the spirit, which are conducted far from the maddening crowd, unseen, silent, and unobtrusive. Indeed, in many faiths, monks and mystics, they lock themselves away from the world, since the clamor and strife of history is regarded as incompatible with a truly religious life. I like how she kind of frames that up. It's helpful to remember. So I want us to enter into an understanding of what Muhammad hoped for Islam and what some, not all Muslims, embrace today. Armstrong reminds us that people have sensed the divine in rocks and mountains and temples and laws and codes in written text and in other men and women. We never experience transcendent directly. Our ecstasy is always earthed, she says, enshrined in something or someone here below. Religious people are trained to look beneath the unpromising surface to find the sacred within it. Their attention on an earthly symbol that is particularly its own, and to teach themselves to see the divine in it. The earthly symbol here would be Muhammad. that they need something earthly to hold on to. In Islam, she says, Muslims have looked for God in history. Their secret scripture, the Quran, gave them a historical mission. Their chief duty was to create a community in which all members, even the weak and the vulnerable, were treated with absolute respect. Their chief duty was to create a community in which all members, even the most weak and vulnerable, were treated with respect. In 1610 CE, we have Muhammad, who was described as an Arab businessman. He went on a 10-day retreat, not uncommon for him, in a cave on the summit of Mount Hira, which is near Mecca. During that time, he fasted and he prayed and he gave alms to the poor. He'd been dismayed about what he had been seeing in the culture around him. Economic disparities were evident in the mercantile city of Mecca. The tribe he was part of, the Quraysh, were experiencing newfound wealth, which was achieved at the expense of others. As depicted in the Bible and throughout history, there were cycles of battles fueled by bad blood, economic interest, and the acquisition of land and power. Eboo Patel, a Muslim interfaith author, describes what happened to Muhammad when he was on the retreat. He was visited by Angel Gabriel, the same Angel Gabriel from the Bible, squeezed 3 times in the angel's grip, and given the first lines of the Quran. Recite in the name of the Lord who created man from a clot. Recite, and your Lord is most generous. So Ramadan, as you saw in the book, follows that timing of the Islamic lunar calendar. It lasts 29 or 30 days. It starts with the viewing of the crescent moon. Some follow the timing when the moon is seen in the Middle East, and others follow the guidance of their local Islamic center. For some, this question is a very serious affair, and it has been an interreligious dispute for a very long time. It was interesting. Leslie was like, I don't know even whether the Islamic Center called the night that they started Ramadan the beginning, but her husband was outside and they saw the moon, so they started. And like other people said, they waited till their parents called them and said, Happy Ramadan, and they knew it was time to start. So, it's kind of a little random, it sounds like sometimes. Ramadan begins at sunset on that first night, and many of you are familiar with the 5 pillars of Islam, which include profession of faith, the central belief that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God, prayer, Muslims pray facing Mecca 5 times a day, alms, fasting, and pilgrimage. So Ramadan is part of the fasting, but it is more than fasting. It's a time when one abstains from smoking and sexual relations from dawn to sunset. You can hear in the book, it's also a time where people try to be sort of kinder, more thoughtful, their best selves. And in addition to praying, there's the reading of that full text of the Quran during the month of Ramadan. Fascinating, isn't it? Imagine being part of a culture where you have a central something that you do for a month every year with folks like you. It must be very powerful. I love how Eboo Patel describes Ramadan as a time of remembrance and return. Remembrance to the origins of Islam and return to its essence. Leslie described it as a time of spiritual inwardness, a training time. There was just a joy and a humility in the way she talked about her practice. When I closed my conversation with her, I said, is there something she wants to make sure that I do not say, or something she wants me to make sure that she hopes I would say? And she said, I just want people to realize Ramadan is not just fasting. Fasting is, however, a powerful tool to deepen your sense of connection and peace. You're probably aware that there are guidelines around fasting that prevent children, pregnant women, people with health issues such as diabetes. They're not expected to fast. So there's grace within that. I do remember my son's friend, though, who was went to the Baha'i temple, and the first year he could fast, he was fired up. So, it's kind of interesting that this rite of passage is something that actually young people often look forward to. Leslie described her experience of Ramadan as you feel like you are glowing the whole month. And I could feel that spirit even in the first day with her when we met. So listen to Patel describe the power of fasting. During Ramadan, Muslims fast to remember the moment that God chose Muhammad as his prophet. We fast to show gratitude for the message God sent through the prophet. We fast to seek God's strength in pursuit of that message. At its essence, the message of the Quran is about monotheism and mercy. Monotheism, that there is one God, our creator, our sustainer, our guide, and mercy, God's most prominent quality, the quality God requires us to embody to our fellow human beings. The most common Muslim prayer is in the name of God, the all-merciful, the ever-merciful. The first lesson classical Muslim scholars taught their students was the famous saying of the Prophet Muhammad, people who show mercy to others will be shown mercy by the all-merciful. In Islamic revelation, the Prophet Muhammad is known as the prophet of mercy. He continues, fasting inspires focus. So often we forget that we came from God. So frequently we neglect to maintain mercy. God guides Muslims to fast so that we may remember and so that we may return. We fast for our souls, but the ayah, which is a verse of the Quran above, suggests that we fast for our surroundings as well. Ramadan in all its fullness inspires a renewed focus on neighbors, especially the needy. Armstrong and many others describe Islam as a faith that has this social justice at its center. Certainly, social justice was on Muhammad's mind as he watched this evolving wealth disparity happening in Mecca. Armstrong describes the process of writing the Quran. He said that the Quran was revealed to Muhammad verse by verse for the next 21 years, often in response to a crisis or a question that had risen in the little community of the faithful. These revelations were painful to Muhammad, who had to say, never once did I have a revelation without thinking that my soul had been torn away from me. In purely secular terms, we could say that Muhammad had perceived the great problems confronting his people at a deeper level than most of his contemporaries, and that he listened to events. He had to delve deeply and painfully into his inner being to find a solution that was not politically viable, but spiritually illuminating. And, she says, he was also creating a new literary form and a masterpiece of prose and poetry. Many of the believers were converted by the sheer beauty of the Quran, which resonated with their deepest aspirations, cutting through their intellectual preconceptions in a manner of great art, inspiring them at a level more profound than the cerebral to alter their whole way of life. I haven't actually read the Quran. I think it's always hard to find a good translation. Yeah, so it always feels rather intimidating to me. I have mentioned my own naive biases about Islam, and I found many of them challenged as I learned more in preparation of this service, particularly when I thought about the role of women. Remember that earlier quote by Armstrong where she reflects on how religion has been co-opted by certain religious leaders? Sure, there are Muslim extremists, because that is what often is given voice or press coverage or circulates over at unchallenged dinner conversations among friends. We've seen the same thing happen in regards to race and queerness and poverty and criminal justice and policing, to name a few. Personal stories, shared experiences, a random news story or character in a movie becomes the seed for a fully grown perception of a classification of people, a whole system, or an entire world religion. Armstrong writes that the emancipation of women was a project dear to Prophet Muhammad's heart. The Quran gave women rights of inheritance and divorce centuries before Western women were accorded such status. The Quran prescribes some degree of segregation and veiling for Prophet's wives, but there is nothing in the Quran that requires the veiling of all women or the seclusion in a separate part of the house. These customs were adopted some 3 or 4 generations after the Prophet's death. We understand this, right? We've seen this happen in other faiths. The women of Medina in Saudi Arabia took full part in public life, and some, according to Arab custom, fought alongside the men in battle. They didn't seem to have experienced Islam as an impressive religion, though later, as it happened in Christianity, men would hijack the faith and bring it in line with the prevailing patriarchy. Mary Hope Schwobel, who's a former senior program officer in the United States Institute of Peace and an associate professor of conflict resolution studies at Nova Southeastern University, spoke about her marriage to a Muslim man. She was Christian, and Christian women actually do not have to convert when you marry a Muslim person. Any people of the book, so Christians and Jewish people, are able to marry and be spouses without needing to convert. But she chose to convert. And on the show On Being with Krista Tippett, she describes her husband as this. He'd never call himself a feminist, and yet I think because of his Muslim beliefs, he had more fundamental respect for women than anybody I have ever met. So in some ways, I felt like he was more of a feminist in practice than anybody I'd met who called themselves a feminist. It's always interesting to hear a different perspective. It's estimated that there's 1.9 billion Muslims in the world, close to 3.5 million in the United States, and an estimated over 114,000 in Minnesota. That makes us one of the top 10 states in the country in terms of a Muslim population. The Muslim community here is far from monolithic, as it includes people from various countries, including Turkey, Bosnia, Somalia, Iraq, many more. In many ways, people from each country and culture remain within their own communities inside this larger Muslim community, just as we sometimes tend to. Ramadan is a time where there is this commonality among Muslims, however, and Leslie said there are very large-scale events hosted in the Twin Cities during this time. These are mega gatherings where diverse groups of Muslims do actually attend together. But Leslie spoke of preferring smaller communities as she participates in this month. For her, it is a deeply personal time and experience. Tasman holds Friday and Saturday night fast breaking together every week, and then the other nights of the week they host dinners for other people. A story that stood out to me on the On Being show when I listened was Samar Jarrah, who's an author and a journalist and the co-host of True Talk, a global affairs show in Tampa. She grew up in Kuwait. She said, I just got back from Jordan and my family was telling me, why can't you just stay a little bit longer and spend the week of Ramadan in Jordan or Egypt? And I said, you'll never understand this, but the best Ramadan I've ever spent in my life is always in America, because I feel sometimes I'm the only person fasting. It's more strenuous. I feel like each day is a jihad for me. It's a struggle to maintain my faith, to maintain my fast, despite the amazing food around me and the smells. If I go shopping or if I go to the mall, there is food everywhere. Everyone is eating except myself. And this brings me amazing strength. And I wake up early in the morning, I can be lecturing, I can be driving to a class 100 miles away, I can be feeding the homeless, I can be doing amazing stuff that I would not be doing if I was living in a Muslim country, because the whole country would be fasting, and I would be one of many. And in contrast, there's the story of Wajahat Ali, who's a columnist and a reporter who wrote a 2022 book called Go Back to Where You Came From and Other Helpful Recommendations on How to Become an American. He shared his experience of being in America and Mecca during Ramadan. He says, when it comes to Ramadan, some of the most beautiful moments that exist within the Muslim community and in Islam become manifest during this month. I remember one time when I went to Mecca, which was the holiest site of pilgrimage for Muslims. I was in Mecca and I was doing Umrah. Umrah is essentially like a mini version of hijab. It's the easiest way I can explain it. And I was in college, and it was during Ramadan. I just finished Umrah, which took about 2.5 hours. I haven't eaten anything. I'm fasting, and it's hot. And I remember praying, I wish the sun would set, and I am hungry. And I remember in the Masjid al-Ram, that's the name of the mosque with what you call the black tube, the Kaaba, in it. The sun set, the entire world just woke up and everybody went to the mosque. I remember about 15 or 20 children came up to me, each one taking my hand and tugging my finger with smiles on their faces. Come, come, come to the mosque, come to the mosque, in Arabic. Basically, what they had done is that they had prepared a small bowl with a date, that's what's often used to break the fast, and some fruit and some milk, thousands of them. Thousands of these bowls on mats for all the Muslims around the city who were coming to the mosque. So these children who I've never met before in this life, just one after another, just said, come to the bowl that I have prepared. Come eat the bowl that I have prepared. No, please eat my bowl. Please eat my bowl. And I sat there eating this bowl, opening my fast next to strangers I've never met before, and greeted them with peace in the mosque, in the holy mosque. There was just this sense of overwhelming beauty, and it's a memory that I cherish. That sometimes when you see the violence and the extremism and the arrogance and the ignorance and the anger, that memory nourishes me. Come to the bowl that I have prepared. We will have the opportunity to eat from the bowl that folks from the Turkish American Society of Minnesota will prepare for us on April 8th. So just again, sign up if you want. It's in the Thursday update. We UUs, we are often accused of being a faith that is lived from the neck up. We can easily find ourselves separating ourselves from people who practice different faiths. Many of us come from traditions that center doctrine and preconceived beliefs over curiosity, exploration, and meaning making. We come from faiths that deem us and people we love as sinners in the eyes of God. I recognize that there are very real obstacles to interfaith work. And I believe that it's important for us and for our shared future to work through them, particularly when it comes to being around progressive people of different faith communities. Needless to say, there is much more to say and to learn. Farid Essek, a South American Muslim scholar and writer and political activist known for his opposition to apartheid and his work in interreligious dialogue, says, I sincerely believe that the only meaningful life is one lived with one's spiritual doors and windows wide open to strangers. The only meaningful life is one lived with one's spiritual doors and windows wide open to strangers. My prayer is that we will continue to seek interfaith connections with our core values at the center of our being. Mindful interdependence, we know we are all connected to each other, whether we like it or not. Authentic curiosity, it's only through curiosity that we will grow and learn. And courageous love, a love that overcomes fear and pain and guides our way. May it be so, and amen.